The first time my husband said the baby wasn't his, he didn't raise his voice, and somehow that hurt more. He said it quietly, standing in the doorway of our bedroom, one hand still on the light switch like he might turn it off and walk away. His voice was flat, careful, like he'd rehearsed the sentence until it no longer belonged to either of us. "I'm not signing anything," he said. "I know that baby isn't mine." I was sitting on the edge of the bed, 8 months pregnant, rubbing slow circles into my lower back because everything hurt these days. My hips, my feet, my pride. The lamp beside me cast a yellow glow on the walls, and for a second I just stared at him, waiting for the rest of the sentence, waiting for a joke, waiting for him to smile and tell me he was scared and didn't mean it. But he didn't. The house was quiet in that way it only gets late at night, when the refrigerator hums too loud and you can hear your own breathing. I remember the smell of lavender lotion on my hands, the one my sister had sent me in a care package. I remember thinking very clearly, this is the moment everything breaks. "Say that again," I whispered. He sighed, like I was the one exhausting him. "I'm not the father. I've done the math. Don't insult me by pretending otherwise." That night, I slept on my side with my hands over my stomach, feeling my baby shift and stretch inside me, and I cried so quietly I scared myself with how practiced I'd become at swallowing sound. Before all of that, before DNA tests and lawyers and truths that rearranged my entire understanding of my marriage, my life was ordinary. And I mean that in the best way. My husband, Daniel, and I had been married for 11 years. We met in our late 20s, both working at the same logistics company, him in operations, me in accounting. He liked to tell people he fell in love with my laugh first. I like to tell people I fell in love with the way he always made room for me on the sidewalk, even when no one was around to see it. We lived in a modest 3-bedroom house on a quiet street where people waved but rarely stopped to talk. Our life followed a rhythm: early mornings, shared coffee, work days full of emails and spreadsheets, evenings spent watching reruns we'd both already seen. On Sundays, Daniel grilled, even in winter, standing outside in a jacket like that somehow proves something about him. I handled birthdays, holidays, thank you cards, all the invisible stitching that keeps a family together. For years, the one ache we carried was infertility, month after month of hope, disappointment folded neatly away so we could keep functioning. I took the vitamins. He pretended not to care as much as I did, which I later realized was his way of protecting himself. When we finally stopped trying, stopped scheduling our intimacy like a chore, something softened between us. We told each other we were enough. So when I got pregnant at 39, it felt like a miracle that arrived late, but right on time. Daniel cried when I told him. He laughed, then cried again, his hands shaking as he pressed them against my stomach like he needed proof. He came to every appointment. He assembled the crib himself, even though the instructions made him curse under his breath. He argued with me about names, about paint colors, about whether babies really needed that many blankets. That's why the shift felt so confusing when it came. It wasn't sudden. It never is. It was a collection of small changes that I noticed but explained away because that's what love teaches you to do. He started working later, or at least that's what he said. He kept his phone face down on the counter. He stopped touching my stomach at night. When I complained about the heartburn or the swelling in my ankles, he listened politely, but with a distance that hadn't been there before, like he was studying me instead of standing with me. Once at dinner, I mentioned the baby kicking during my lunch break. He paused, fork hovering midair, and asked, "Are you sure that's normal this early?" I laughed it off. "Daniel, I'm almost 7 months. The baby could audition for Riverdance." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Another time, I caught him staring at me while I folded laundry, not with affection, with calculation. When I asked what was wrong, he said nothing too quickly, then left the room. I told myself he was scared. Men panic, people say, especially when life changes this big. I told myself love meant patience. But the night he accused me, no, declared that the baby wasn't his, I realized he'd already made his decision long before he spoke it out loud. The weeks that followed were some of the loneliest of my life. Daniel moved into the guest room. He stopped coming to appointments. When people asked how the pregnancy was going, he let me answer alone. He refused to touch me, refused to talk about the future. He didn't yell or throw things or storm out, and in some ways, that was worse. He withdrew, built walls, let silence do the damage for him. I asked him once, through tears I didn't bother hiding anymore, "Why would you think I could do something like that to you?" He looked at the floor. People do worse things every day. That's when I realized this wasn't just about doubt. It was about something else he wasn't telling me. At night, lying alone, I replayed our entire marriage, searching for a moment where I might have betrayed him without knowing it. I wondered if grief over our infertility had quietly poisoned something between us. I wondered if I loved him wrong. And somewhere beneath all of that fear, a quieter thought began to form, one I was almost afraid to name. If he was so sure the baby wasn't his, then whose truth was he protecting? The baby arrived on a Thursday morning, just after dawn, while the sky outside the hospital window was still that pale blue that feels like a promise. Daniel wasn't there. My sister held my hand instead, her palm warm and steady, whispering encouragement as the contractions came closer together. The room smelled like antiseptic and stale coffee. The monitor beeped in a rhythm that felt too calm for the storm happening inside my body. Between pushes, I kept glancing at the door, half expecting Daniel to walk in at the last minute, breathless and apologetic, holding flowers and fear. I imagined him saying, "I was wrong, I'm here now," but the door stayed closed. When my daughter finally cried, a sharp, angry sound that filled the room, something in me cracked open and stitched itself back together at the same time. They placed her on my chest, slippery and warm, her tiny face scrunched like she already had opinions about the world. "She's beautiful," my sister said, crying openly. I nodded, because if I spoke, I might have shattered completely. Daniel texted 2 hours later. "Let me know when you're ready to talk about next steps." No congratulations, no questions about her health, no curiosity about who she looked like. I stared at the message until the screen dimmed, then turned my phone face down and pulled my daughter closer, breathing in that sweet, milky smell that felt like forgiveness itself. Daniel came to see her 3 days later. He stood at the foot of my hospital bed, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the bundle beside me. He looked uncomfortable, like he'd wandered into the wrong room. "That's her?" he asked. I nodded. "Her name is Lily." He didn't smile. He didn't step closer. He didn't ask to hold her. "She doesn't look like me," he said. Something hot rose in my chest. "She's 3 days old, Daniel. She looks like a baby." He shrugged. "I'm just saying." That was the moment I stopped begging him to believe me. When we got home, the house felt different, hollow, echoing in places it never had before. Daniel stayed distant, polite in a way that felt rehearsed. He didn't wake up for night feedings. He didn't learn how to change a diaper. When friends dropped off meals, he thanked them and disappeared. A week later, he handed me a pamphlet from a lab. "DNA testing," he said. "We'll settle this once and for all." I looked at the glossy paper, then up at him. "And if it proves she's yours?" His jaw tightened. "Then I'll do what's right." The way he said it told me he didn't expect that outcome. I agreed to the test because I knew the truth had nothing to fear. What I didn't realize was that the truth was about to expose far more than either of us had prepared for. The days waiting for the results dragged like wet laundry. Daniel grew more irritable, more distracted. He started taking phone calls outside. Sometimes he left late at night and came back smelling like unfamiliar soap. Not perfume, just different. Once, while he showered, his phone buzzed on the bathroom counter. A message preview lit up the screen. "She keeps asking about you." No name, just that. my stomach tightened, but I forced myself to look away. I told myself I was exhausted, hormonal, paranoid. Still, the seed had been planted. 2 weeks later, the email came in. I opened it alone at the kitchen table, Lily asleep in her bassinet beside me. The afternoon sun slanted through the blinds, dust motes floating lazily like they had no idea what was about to change. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Relief washed over me first, sweet, validating, grounding. Then anger followed close behind, sharp and insistent. Daniel was wrong, and now he had to face it. I forwarded the email to him with a single sentence. "We need to talk." He came home early that day, too early. His face was pale, his movements stiff. He came home early that day, too early. His face was pale, his movements stiff. "I saw the results," he said, not meeting my eyes. "And?" I asked. He swallowed. I didn't expect that." I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Funny, I did." He sat down heavily, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor like it might offer him guidance. "I owe you an apology," he said. "Yes," I agreed. "You do." Silence stretched between us. Lily stirred, letting out a soft sigh, unaware of the earthquake happening inches away. Daniel rubbed his hands together. "There's something else I need to tell you." My heart sank even before he spoke. "I didn't accuse you because I thought you cheated. Not really." I looked at him, every nerve in my body on edge. "Then why?" He closed his eyes. "Because I already knew what it felt like to lie about a child." The words landed heavy, thick with implication. "What are you saying?" I whispered. He exhaled shakily. I have another family." The room seemed to tilt. "Another what?" My voice sounded far away, like it belonged to someone else. "There's a woman," he continued, still not looking at me. "It started years ago, casual. I never meant it for it to become this." "How long?" I asked. 7 years. 7 years? Before I could stop myself, I laughed, a hollow, disbelieving sound that startled even me. 7 years, I repeated. "So while we were crying over infertility—" He nodded, shame finally flickering across his face. "She got pregnant. Twice." The air left my lungs. "Twice?" I echoed. "A boy and a girl," he said quietly. "They're 6 and 4. I gripped the edge of the table so hard my fingers ached. Images flashed through my mind, birthdays he'd missed, late nights he explained away, money that never quite added up. "And you thought my baby wasn't yours because you couldn't imagine the universe giving you a third one." He flinched. "I panicked," he said. "I thought, maybe it was my way out." My way out. Those words burned. "So instead of confessing, you accused me of cheating? You abandoned me during my pregnancy? You let me give birth alone?" Tears filled his eyes. I was scared. I stood up, my legs shaking but steady enough to carry me where I needed to go, to my daughter. "You don't get to be scared," I said quietly. "You made choices, and now you live with them." He reached for my arm. I stepped back. "I want to make things right," he said desperately. "I'll end it with her. I'll be here. I'll be a father to Lily." I looked at him then, really looked at him, at the man who had split his life in two and called it survival. "No," I said, "you don't get to choose now." That night, after he fell asleep on the couch, I sat in the nursery and watched Lily breathe. Her tiny chest rose and fell, trusting the world without question. I whispered promises to her, promises I didn't know how I'd keep yet, but knew I had to try. And somewhere between the rocking chair and the dawn, I made a decision. The truth would come out, not in anger, not in revenge, but in daylight. I didn't expose Daniel right away. Not because I was protecting him, but because I needed time to understand what the truth meant for me. The morning after his confession, I woke before the sun. The house was quiet, except for Lily's soft breathing through the baby monitor. Daniel slept on the couch, one arm hanging off the side, his face slack with exhaustion, and something that looked a lot like regret. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the steam curling upward, thinking about all the versions of my life that had existed without my knowledge. 7 years. That meant his other children were conceived during our marriage, during the years I cried in bathroom stalls after another negative pregnancy test. It meant while I blamed my body, he was proving his worked just fine, just not with me. I felt anger, yes, but beneath it was something colder, clarity. By the time Daniel woke up, I had already fed Lily, showered, and dressed. I felt oddly calm, like I'd crossed into a different room inside myself, where panic couldn't reach. "We need to talk about what happens next," I said. He nodded quickly. "I've been thinking all night." "I'm sure you have," I replied, "but this conversation isn't about what you want." That gave him pause. "I'm going to speak to a lawyer," I continued, "not because I want revenge, because I need to protect my daughter." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. "I understand." "And," I added, "I want full transparency. I want to know everything: how long, how much money, where they live, what promises you've made." His shoulders sagged. "That's fair." For the first time since Lily was born, he didn't argue. Over the next few days, the truth spilled out in pieces. The woman's name was Marissa. She was younger, not dramatically, but enough. They met at a conference out of state. One mistake turned into a routine, a hotel here, a weekend there. When she got pregnant the first time, she hadn't known about me. When she found out, she stayed anyway. "She said she didn't want to break up a family," Daniel told me, rubbing his temples. "She just wanted help raising the kids." "And you thought that made it better?" I asked. He said, "I thought I was managing it." Managing, like a calendar conflict, like a budget. He'd been sending her money every month, amounts small enough to not raise suspicion, but consistent. He had a second phone, a second set of excuses, a second life that ran parallel to mine, close enough to touch, but far enough to hide. What struck me most wasn't just the betrayal, it was the logistics, the planning, the energy it took to maintain so many lies. Energy that could have gone into us. The lawyer confirmed what I already suspected. Daniel's obligations to his other children didn't erase his responsibility to Lily, but they complicated everything: finances, custody, the future. "You're not required to protect his secrets," she told me gently, "especially when they affect your child." That sentence stayed with me. The first person I told was my sister. We sat in her living room, Lily sleeping in my arms, the afternoon light warm and forgiving. I told her everything: the accusation, the DNA test, the second family. She listened without interrupting, her face growing more serious with every word. When I finished, she leaned forward. "You didn't imagine this, and you didn't cause it." I nodded, tears finally slipping free. "I know, but knowing doesn't make it easier." "No," she said, "but it makes it cleaner." The next was my mother. That conversation was harder. She cried, she asked questions I didn't want to answer, she wanted to know what I planned to do, whether I could forgive, whether Lily would grow up without a father. I don't know yet, I said honestly, but I know I won't raise her inside a lie. Daniel hadn't told anyone yet. He asked me for time to handle it, time to talk to Marissa, time to prepare. I gave him 1 week, not out of kindness, out of dignity. The truth came out on a Sunday afternoon in the most ordinary way possible. Daniel's parents had invited us over for lunch. They adored Lily. They were the kind of grandparents who argued over who got to hold her, who bought too many clothes and called her our miracle. I watched Daniel closely that day, the way he smiled too tightly, the way his hands shook when his mother passed him a plate. He knew this was coming. After dessert, while Lily slept in her carrier, I cleared my throat. "There's something we need to talk about," I said. The room quieted. Daniel's mother looked at him expectantly. His father folded his hands. Daniel stared at his lap. "I'm going to speak," I continued, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. "I'm going to tell you everything. Not with drama, not with accusation, just facts laid out carefully, like fragile items on a table." When I finished, the silence was heavy. Daniel's mother was the first to speak. "Is this true?" she asked him, her voice trembling. He nodded. "Yes." She covered her mouth with her hand. His father stood up slowly, walked to the window, and stared outside. "And you accused her?" she asked, pointing at me, "while she was pregnant?" Daniel didn't answer. His mother turned to me, eyes shining with tears. "I'm so sorry," she said. "You didn't deserve this." That moment, that acknowledgement felt like a small justice. Word spread after that, quietly, then all at once. Friends stopped calling Daniel. Some reached out to me. Others didn't know what to say and said nothing. Marissa contacted me a week later. Her message was careful, polite. "I think we should talk, for the children." We met at a cafe halfway between our homes. She looked tired, older than I expected. Motherhood had etched itself into her face the way it had into mine. "You didn't know about me at first," she said, hands wrapped around her cup. "But I stayed for the kids. I stayed for love, and that didn't save me either." She nodded. "I never wanted this. Neither did I." There was no yelling, no catfight, just two women sitting across from each other, bound by a man's cowardice. "You won't interfere with Lily's life," she said quietly. "I appreciate that, but understand this. I won't protect his lies. Not anymore." She nodded again. "I don't expect you to." When I walked out of that cafe, the air felt lighter, like I'd set something down that wasn't mine to carry. Daniel moved out a month later. He cried when he packed his things. He asked if there was any chance. I told him the truth. "I don't hate you, but I don't trust you, and without trust, there's nothing left to build on." He nodded, tears streaking his face, and for the first time, I felt no urge to comfort him. That night, alone in the house with Lily, I rocked her until she slept and whispered the same promise again. We will be okay. Not because the world is fair, but because I will tell you the truth and teach you how to stand in it. The consequences didn't arrive all at once. They came in waves, quiet at first, then impossible to ignore. Daniel's other life, the one he'd kept neatly folded away for years, began to unravel under the weight of daylight. His parents insisted on meeting Marissa and the children. His siblings stopped returning his calls. At work, whispers followed him down hallways he used to walk confidently. I wasn't watching closely, but I heard enough. What surprised me most wasn't how people judged him. It was how quickly they stopped seeing me as his wife and started seeing me as Lily's mother. Strangers held doors for me again. Friends who had drifted came back with casseroles and awkward hugs. Women I barely knew touched my arm and said, "You're strong," like strength was something I'd chosen instead of something I'd been forced into. The custody conversations were tense, but civil. Daniel wanted time with Lily. I didn't deny him that, not out of forgiveness, but because Lily deserved to know her father as he truly was, not as a ghost or a villain. Supervised visits at first, short afternoons, Daniel holding her carefully like he was afraid she might disappear. Watching him with her was strange. He was gentle, awkward, earnest in a way he'd never been with me. Once, after a visit, he lingered by the door. "She looks like you," he said softly. I nodded. "She does." "And a little like my mom." "Yes," I said, "she does." That was all. The hardest part came months later, when Lily was almost 1. Daniel called me late one evening. His voice sounded thin, stretched. "I need to tell you something," he said. I closed my eyes. "Go on." "Marissa's leaving," he said. "She's taking the kids back to her home state." I felt a flicker of something. Not satisfaction, not relief, just sadness. "She says I can't trust me," he continued. "She says I lie even when I'm telling the truth." I almost laughed at that. "I wanted you to hear it from me," he added. "Thank you," I said, and meant it. After we hung up, I sat on the couch long after Lily had fallen asleep, thinking about how lies have a way of collapsing in on themselves, how nothing built on secrecy stays standing forever. I started therapy that winter. At first, I told myself it was for Lily, to make sure I was healthy, steady, whole. But quickly, I realized it was for me. "I feel embarrassed," I admitted during one session, "like I should have known." My therapist shook her head gently. "You trusted someone you loved. That's not a flaw." Some days I believed her. Some days I still replayed moments from my marriage, searching for signs I'd missed. But over time, those thoughts lost their sharpness. They became memories instead of accusations. I learned to sit with discomfort, to let questions go unanswered, to forgive myself for not being omniscient. Lily took her first steps in the spring. She toddled across the living room toward me, arms outstretched, laughing like the world was something safe and kind. I dropped to my knees and caught her, burying my face in her hair, breathing her in. In that moment, I understood something with surprising clarity. My life hadn't ended. It had changed, and change, I was learning, didn't always mean loss. Daniel and I found a rhythm. We spoke about Lily, we shared schedules, we stayed polite, careful, distant. There were moments, small ones, when he looked at me like he wanted to say more, apologize again, explain again. I didn't stop him out of cruelty. I stopped him because some conversations don't heal, they reopen. One afternoon, while Lily napped, Daniel called me. "Do you ever regret it, telling everyone?" I considered the question. "No," I said. "I regret the years I lived without the truth." He nodded slowly, like he was filing that answer away somewhere painful and necessary. The final consequence came quietly. Daniel's second family moved away. His parents tried, at first, to stay neutral, to balance birthdays and holidays between grandchildren separated by miles and circumstance. But distance does strange things to relationships. Eventually, they chose proximity. They stayed close to Lily. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I watched from the sidelines as Daniel adjusted to a smaller version of the life he'd built too large to manage. A year after the DNA test, I sat at the same kitchen table where I'd first opened the email that changed everything. Lily was asleep in her room. The house was still. I thought about the woman I'd been that day, afraid, hopeful, desperate for validation. I wish I could reach back through time and tell her this: the truth won't destroy you, it will free you. Life didn't settle all at once after that. It never does. Healing, I learned, isn't a clean line from pain to peace. It's more like learning how to live in a house after a storm, walls still standing, some windows broken, the air smelling faintly of damage even as new light comes in. By the time Lily turned 2, the sharpest edges of the betrayal had dulled. Not disappeared, just softened enough that I could breathe around them. Mornings became my favorite part of the day. Lily would wake up babbling to herself, the sound crackling through the baby monitor like a small radio signal from a happier world. I'd pad down the hallway, still half asleep, and she'd stand in her crib when she saw me, hair sticking up, cheeks flushed, reaching out like I was the only thing that mattered. "Morning, sunshine," I'd whisper, lifting her. She smelled like sleep and warm cotton. Sometimes I'd just hold her there, standing in the doorway, letting the quiet settle over us. Those moments felt earned. Daniel stayed consistent. He showed up when he said he would, paid child support without complaint, learned Lily's favorite snacks, asked about her daycare, her milestones, her tiny fears. But something in him had changed. He was more subdued, less certain, like a man who had finally understood the cost of being divided. Once, during a drop-off, he watched Lily run back toward me after hugging him goodbye. "She knows where home is," he said quietly. "Yes," I replied, "she does." There was no bitterness in my voice, just truth. I started rebuilding parts of myself I hadn't realized I'd set aside during my marriage. I took a promotion at work that I'd once thought would be too demanding. I repainted the living room a color Daniel never liked, a warm, calm blue that made the space feel like it could hold new stories. I make friends with a woman down the street, another single mother, and we started trading babysitting so we could remember what it felt like to sit in silence or drink coffee while it was still hot. Some nights after Lily was asleep, I sat alone with a book and felt something close to contentment. Other nights, the memories came back uninvited, a song Daniel used to hum, the way he'd once tucked my hair behind my ear. On those nights, I let myself grieve the marriage I thought I had, not the man, the idea. One afternoon, while sorting old paperwork, I found the DNA test results tucked into a folder I hadn't opened in months. I stared at the numbers, the clinical language, 99.99%. Proof. For a long time, I'd thought of that document as a weapon, something that defended me, justified me, vindicated me. But holding it then, I realized it had served its purpose. It had given me back my voice. I shredded it slowly, the paper tearing with a sound that felt final, then threw it away. I didn't need proof anymore. Lily started asking questions soon after her 3rd birthday, simple ones at first. Why Daddy's house? Why Daddy not sleep here? I answered honestly, carefully. Mommy and Daddy don't live together, I said, but we both love you. She accepted that explanation easily. Children often do. They live in the present, unburdened by the layers adults pile onto everything. But I knew harder questions would come, and I promised myself I would never lie to her. I wouldn't tell her more than she could carry, but I wouldn't rewrite history to make it prettier. Truth, I'd learned, could be gentle if handled with care. The day Daniel finally told his parents he was losing contact with his other children, he called me afterward. "I didn't expect it to hurt like this," he admitted. I held the phone to my ear, listening. "He doesn't talk to me," he said. "They say they need space." "I'm sorry," I replied. And I was, because even when someone causes their own pain, pain is still pain. But empathy didn't mean reconciliation. It just meant I hadn't hardened into someone I didn't recognize. Years passed. Lily grew into herself, curious, stubborn, kind in ways that startled me. She loved animals. She hated loud noises. She asked 1,000 questions a day and remembered the answers. Sometimes I caught glimpses of Daniel in her expressions, in the way her brow furrowed when she concentrated. Other times, she was all me, and sometimes she was something entirely her own. On Lily's 5th birthday, we had a small party at the park. Balloons bobbed in the breeze, cupcakes melted too fast, children shrieked and ran and collapsed into giggles. Daniel arrived on time, carrying a gift wrapped too carefully. We exchanged polite smiles. We stood on opposite sides of the picnic table like we always did. At one point, as Lily played, he stood beside me watching her. "I was wrong," he said suddenly, "about everything." I looked at him. "I know," I replied. "I don't expect forgiveness," he added quickly. I wanted you to know I see it now." I nodded. "Seeing it now doesn't change what happened, but it might change what you do next." He swallowed. "I'm trying." That was enough. Not absolution, but acknowledgement. That night, after Lily fell asleep, I sat on the porch and watched the sky darken. I thought about how close I'd come to believing Daniel's accusation, how easily shame had tried to attach itself to me. And I thought about the women like me, the ones who are doubted, dismissed, gaslit into questioning their own reality. I wish I could sit beside each of them and say what I now know to be true. Someone else's lie does not define you. I never remarried, not because I was broken, but because I became whole in a way I hadn't been before. I dated a little, I laughed, I learned what it felt like to choose rather than settle. But my life didn't feel incomplete without a partner. It felt intentional. One evening, when Lily was 7, she climbed into my bed during a thunderstorm. She curled against me, small and warm, and asked, "Mommy, are you happy?" The question caught me off guard. I thought about it carefully. "Yes," I said finally, "I am." She smiled, satisfied, and drifted back to sleep. I lay there listening to the rain, thinking about how happiness doesn't always look the way we imagined it would, but it can still be real, still be enough. The truth didn't give me a perfect ending. It gave me an honest life. And that, I had learned, was worth everything. There are moments in life that don't announce themselves as turning points until long after they've passed. For me, one of those moments came on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, years after the accusation, the DNA test, the unraveling. Lily was 8 then, long-limbed, sharp-eyed, already developing opinions about everything from cereal brands to fairness. I picked her up from school and she climbed into the back seat with a quiet that immediately caught my attention. "Everything okay?" I asked, starting the engine. She hesitated. "A kid said something today." I waited. Silence, I'd learned, often did more than questions. "He said my dad has other kids," she said finally, staring out the window. "He said my family is weird." My hands tightened on the steering wheel, but my voice stayed calm. "How did that make you feel?" "Mad," she said. Then, after a pause, "and confused." I pulled into a grocery store parking lot and turned off the engine. "Okay," I said gently, "let's talk about it." We sat there for a long time, the afternoon sun slanting through the windshield, the hum of passing cars filling the space between us. I didn't tell her everything, not yet, but I told her enough. I told her families come in many shapes. I told her adults sometimes make choices that hurt people, and that those choices don't belong to the children who come afterward. I told her her father loved her, even if he hadn't always loved well. She listened quietly, absorbing more than she said. When I finished, she nodded. "So it's not my fault?" "No," I said firmly, "never." That night, after she fell asleep, I cried harder than I had in years, not because the truth was painful, but because it had reached her world now, because the consequences of Daniel's choices had finally touched the person I'd worked so hard to protect. And still, even through the fear, I felt something else. Pride. because I hadn't lied to her. Daniel called me a week later. "I heard Lily had a rough day at school," he said carefully. "Yes," I replied. He said, I think it's time I tell her more about my other kids." I closed my eyes. That's a conversation we should plan together. We did. We sat at my kitchen table, the same one that had witnessed so many endings, with mugs of untouched tea growing cold. Daniel looked older than I remembered, lines etched deeper around his eyes. "I want to do this right," he said. "That starts with honesty and accountability." When he spoke to Lily, his voice shook. He admitted his mistakes. He apologized, not just to her, but in front of her to me. He didn't defend himself, didn't minimize. Lily asked questions, simple ones, hard ones. "Do they know about me?" "Yes." "Did you love them more?" "No." She listened. She cried a little. Then she asked if she could go play. Children, I've learned, know when they've reached their emotional limit. After Daniel left, Lily curled up next to me on the couch. "Mom?" "Yes, baby?" "Thank you for telling me the truth." That was the moment I knew I'd done something right. Life continued, not perfectly, but steadily. There were school projects and scraped knees and birthday sleepovers. There were mornings when I forgot, briefly, that my life hadn't turned out the way I once imagined. And then there were reminders. Like the day I ran into Marissa at a rest stop off the highway. I almost didn't recognize her at first. She looked thinner, tired, but when our eyes met, recognition flickered instantly. We stood there awkwardly between vending machines and plastic plants. "How are you?" she asked. "I'm okay. You?" She hesitated. "Managing." We talked for a few minutes about the kids, about distance, about how strange it is to share history without sharing a life. Before we parted, she said quietly, "I should have left sooner." I nodded. We all think that. Driving away, I felt no anger, just a distant compassion for both of us, for the versions of ourselves who'd believed what we needed to believe to survive. As Lily grew older, I noticed something else changing. My fear. For years, I'd lived with a quiet vigilance, a readiness for the next shoe to drop. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, that tension loosened. I trusted myself now, trusted my instincts, trusted my ability to handle hard truths. That trust changed how I moved through the world. I spoke up more at work, set boundaries without apologizing, walked away from conversations that felt wrong instead of trying to fix them. One afternoon, a coworker confided in me that she suspected her husband was cheating. "I don't know what to do," she whispered. I listened. I didn't tell her what to decide. I just said, "Whatever the truth is, you deserve to know it." She looked at me like I'd handed her a key. Daniel's life settled into something quieter. He saw Lily regularly. He sent photos of her to his other children, though the connection remained distant, mediated by geography and unresolved hurt. He said, during a rare moment of vulnerability, "I wish I'd been brave earlier." Bravery isn't retroactive. It only counts going forward. He nodded. Sometimes I wondered if he carried regret the way I once carried fear, heavy, constant, shaping every thought. But that wasn't mine to manage. I had my own life to live. One evening, years after the accusation that started it all, I found myself alone in the house again. Lily was at a sleepover. The silence felt strange now, not empty, just different. I poured a glass of wine and walked through the rooms, noticing details I'd once overlooked, the photos on the walls, the worn spot on the couch where Lily always sat, the quiet strength of a life rebuilt piece by piece. I paused in front of the mirror in the hallway. I looked older than I used to, softer in some places, stronger in others. I thought about the woman I'd been, sitting on the edge of the bed, 8 months pregnant, accused of something she hadn't done. I wish I could tell her this, too.
You will survive being misunderstood. You will survive being doubted. You will survive the truth. Later that night, Lily called to say goodnight. I miss you. I miss you too. I'm glad you're my mom. I smiled into the phone, my throat tight. I'm glad you're my daughter. When I hung up, I sat in the quiet for a long time, feeling the weight and wonder of the life I'd built, not out of perfection, but out of honesty. The storm hadn't destroyed my home. It had shown me which parts were strong enough to remain.
There was a season after that, a long, quiet one, where nothing dramatic happened, and that in itself felt unfamiliar. No court dates, no confrontations, no revelations waiting in my inbox. Just life, unfolding at a pace slow enough to notice. Lily was 10 when she started keeping a journal. She hid it under her mattress, but she wasn't very good at secrecy, never had been. Sometimes I'd find it left open on the bed, her handwriting looping and uneven, full of questions and observations about the world. One afternoon, while folding laundry, I noticed a page that read, "Mom says the truth matters even when it hurts. I think that's brave." I closed the notebook gently and put it back where I'd found it, my chest aching in that quiet, grateful way that comes when you realize your child has been watching you all along. Daniel and I attended our first school event together that year, a science fair. We stood side by side, reading poster boards covered with glitter and misspelled words, nodding politely like two adults who had practiced being calm in the same room. Lily bounced between us, excited and proud. "Did you see my volcano?" she asked. "Yes," Daniel said. "It was very explosive." She groaned. "Dad!" I hid a smile. For a moment, just a moment, things felt almost normal. Not like before, not like the life I'd lost, but like a different kind of normal, one shaped by boundaries instead of denial. Later, while Lily talked with her friends, Daniel leaned toward me. "You did a good job," he said quietly. "With what?" I asked. "With her," he said. "With everything." I nodded once. I did what I had to do. He looked like he wanted to say more, but he didn't. That restraint, that awareness of limits, was something he'd learned too late for us, but not too late for her. There were still hard days. Days when Lily came home quiet again. Days when she asked questions I wasn't ready for. Why do grown-ups lie? Why didn't Dad just tell the truth? Do people always hurt the ones they love? Those questions sat heavy in the air, and I never rushed to answer them. "Sometimes people lie because they're afraid," I said once. "And sometimes," I added another day, "they lie because they don't want to face the consequences." She thought about that. "That doesn't seem fair." No, I agreed, it isn't. But fairness, I was learning, wasn't something the world handed out evenly. It was something you built for yourself where you could. When Lily was 11, Daniel's other children came to town for the first time. He told me ahead of time, his voice careful. "They want to meet her, if you're okay with that." I took a breath before answering. "Let's talk about how," I said. We met at a park, neutral ground, open air, space to step away if things got overwhelming. The children were polite, curious, cautious. They looked at Lily with interest, not resentment. Children, again, proving they were often wiser than adults. Lily asked them what games they liked. They asked her about school. They ran off together, chasing each other across the grass, laughter rising like something uncomplicated and clean. I watched from a bench, my hands folded in my lap, my heart doing something slow and strange. This wasn't the future I'd imagined, but it wasn't the disaster I'd feared either. Marissa stayed nearby, keeping her distance. At one point, our eyes met. We nodded, not friends, not enemies, just two women navigating the aftermath of choices we'd made and choices made for us. When the afternoon ended, Lily hugged her half-siblings without hesitation. On the drive home, she was quiet again. "Did that feel weird?" I asked gently.
She shrugged. A little, but they were nice. That's okay, I said. It's allowed to be both. She smiled faintly. You always say that. Yes, I replied, because it's true. That night, after she went to bed, I sat alone in the living room, the house humming softly around me. I thought about how complicated life had become, how many layers now existed where there had been just one. And I thought about how much strength it took to stay honest in a world that rewarded pretending. Daniel texted later that evening, "Thank you for today." I stared at the message for a moment before replying. We're doing what's best for her. No heart emojis, no softness, just truth. As Lily entered her teenage years, I watched her develop a strong sense of right and wrong. She hated injustice, spoke up when she saw classmates being treated unfairly, questioned authority with a sharpness that made some teachers uncomfortable. One evening, after a disagreement at school, she said, "I don't like it when people act like the truth is optional." I looked at her across the dinner table, seeing echoes of myself and something entirely new. "I don't either," I said. "Is that why you left Dad?" she asked suddenly. The question landed gently but firmly. "I didn't leave because of one mistake," I said slowly. "I left because of many choices, and because I needed to live honestly." She thought about that. "I think I'd do the same," she said. I didn't respond right away. I just reached across the table and squeezed her hand. There were moments when grief resurfaced unexpectedly, at weddings, at anniversaries that passed without notice, at quiet evenings when I wondered how different my life might have been if Daniel had told the truth earlier. But those thoughts no longer spiraled. They came, they stayed, they left. And in their place was something steadier, self-trust. I ran into an old acquaintance one afternoon, someone who knew Daniel and me before everything happened. She said, "I heard what you went through. I don't know how you survived it." I smiled politely, one honest step at a time. She nodded, but I could tell she didn't quite understand. Survival, I'd learned, often looked quiet from the outside. The last conversation Daniel and I had that truly mattered came on an unremarkable day. Lily was 15 then, confident, thoughtful, already imagining her future. Daniel and I stood in my driveway after dropping her off at a friend's house. "I owe you something," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "You don't owe me anything." "I owe you acknowledgement," he corrected. "I didn't destroy our family. I did." I studied him for a moment. "Thank you for saying that, but I stopped needing you to say it a long time ago." He nodded, accepting that. We stood there in silence, the past finally quiet between us. That night, alone again, I thought about the arc of my life, how betrayal had cracked it open, how truth had reshaped it, how dignity had held it together. I wasn't proud of what I'd endured. I was proud of how I'd responded.
There's a quiet moment that comes after a long storm. Not the moment when the thunder stops, but the one after, when you step outside and notice the air smells different, cleaner, like something heavy has passed through and taken its chaos with it. That's where I am now. Not untouched, not unscarred, but standing. Sometimes late at night, when the house is finally still and Lily is asleep, I sit at the edge of my bed and let myself remember the woman I used to be, the one who believed love meant endurance, the one who thought loyalty required silence, the one who sat on this same bed, 8 months pregnant, being told her baby wasn't her husband's, and almost believed that shame belonged to her. I think about how close I came to shrinking myself to survive someone else's lie, and I'm grateful I didn't. What I've learned over all these years is that betrayal doesn't just break trust, it tests identity. It asks you who you are when the story you were living turns out not to be real. It asks whether you'll rewrite yourself to fit the lie or step into the truth, no matter how lonely that feels at first. I didn't choose this lesson, but I chose how I carried it. I chose not to scream when silence would be louder. I chose not to seek revenge when dignity would last longer. I chose not to protect a man's image at the expense of my child's future. And that choice, quiet, steady, unglamorous, changed everything. Lily knows the truth now, not all at once, not carelessly, but honestly. She knows that adults can fail and still be responsible. She knows that love without truth isn't love at all. She knows that her worth was never up for debate, not in a marriage, not in a DNA test, not in anyone else's doubt. And when I watch her move through the world, asking hard questions, standing up for herself, trusting her instincts, I see proof that truth doesn't poison children. Lies do. People sometimes ask me if I regret how everything came out, if I wish I'd handled it differently, if I would have stayed quiet knowing how painful the aftermath would be. And the answer is always the same. No. Because peace built on silence isn't peace. It's a pause before another fracture. I didn't win anything when the DNA test came back. I didn't feel triumph when Daniel's second family was exposed. I didn't celebrate his losses or his regret. What I felt was clarity. And clarity, I've learned, is more powerful than justice delivered loudly. If you're listening to my story right now and you are in that place, the place where something feels wrong but you can't quite name it, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not crazy for asking questions. You are not disloyal for wanting the truth. You are not weak for needing proof when someone is gaslighting your reality. And if you're being accused of something you didn't do, especially when you're already vulnerable, please know this. Someone else's guilt will often look for a place to hide. Don't let it live inside you. Truth has a way of surfacing even when it's buried under years of effort and lies. And when it does, it doesn't always arrive with relief right away. Sometimes it comes with loss, with loneliness, with a version of life you never planned for. But it also comes with something else: freedom.